Hey guys, long time no see. As Jinx Season 2 is making a comeback this November, I thought that I might too. This will be a longish recap. I will try to only go over the major events, but I might get sidetracked, so buckle up. Things between Dan and Jaekyung started going downhill back when this guy, Alfredo, allegedly sustained an injury while training for the match. Alfredo was sidelined from participating in the match and replaced with Baek Junmin from King of MMA Gym. It was a shocking turn of events since the guy was just a rookie in the boxing world. But it so happened that the higher-ups favored him for some reason. The guy was rumored to be a living legend in the underground fighting ring, famous for fixing matches between fighters. Surprisingly, Jaekyung commented that Baek Junmin looked familiar when the team was watching a rare footage of Baek fighting. This begs the question, where exactly do they know each other from? The author has been stingy with details of Jaekyung's past, and will hopefully get some answers in the coming season. Right around that time, Dan got his grandma's biopsy result. Sadly, the cancer wasn't shrinking, and the trial medication she was on didn't seem to help much. To make matters even worse, surgery was out of the question given her advanced age. I can't imagine what he was going through in that moment after receiving such devastating news. Grandma has been the only family to Dan from the time he was a toddler, and no matter what life threw at them, she was always there for every major milestone in his life. In the middle of him rightly breaking down in front of his grandma, he got several calls from an unknown number that went unanswered. The caller decided to send a text at the end, and it turned out to be none other than the director of Baek Junmin's gym. You've got to admire the guy's persistence in trying to reach Dan, calling after being rejected multiple times. He even had the guts to look for Doc in person at his place of work when the phone calls weren't going through. Dan refused to meet up with Choi and hear him out over a meal, until the conniving snake landed a low blow by mentioning Grandma's diagnosis from the hospital. To further get Dan's sympathy, he pretended to have lost an elderly mother to illness, and therefore understood what he was going through. This smirk says it all. Everything he spoke of was nothing but a lie. Dan, being the kind person that he is, fell for the ruse and finally agreed to talk over coffee. The whole point of that meeting was to poach Dan to go work for King of MMA Gym with tempting offers like doubling his salary, providing accommodation, and even a car for his commute. When Dan declined the seemingly tantalizing offer, Choi decided to strike at his grandmother once again. Apparently there was a trial drug in the US that would take forever to get to Korea, but it just happened that Choi's parent company owned that pharmaceutical. The other option was for Dan to spill secrets of Jaekyung's game plan for the upcoming match, and Choi would make sure his grandma got access to the best treatment. It would be pretentious to say Dan didn't consider the offer for a split second. Between his grandma, who's done so much for him, and his current employer, who helped him out in some sticky situations. That night, when Jaekyung got back to the apartment late, Dan offered to give him a massage to ease his sore muscles, and also talk about what had happened earlier with Choi. Jaekyung declined the offer, stating he was busy watching footage of Baek Junmin fighting in the ring. It was revealed that Dan turned down the suspiciously sweet offer from Choi, who was outraged someone could turn down such an amazing once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. What a crazy person he turned out to be. Dan was right to leave and not listen to his nonsense anymore. As if on cue, some unknown number sent Jaekyung a picture of Dan meeting with Choi, making them seem chummy. A day before the big match, Team Black Gym and their rival passed each other by accidentally, though it wouldn't be a surprise if King of MMA guys orchestrated the meeting. Dan felt uncomfortable seeing Choi after their conversation, and Jaekyung noticed that suspicious reaction. Baek Junmin said something that triggered Jaekyung, which was a rare occurrence for him to be shaken by anyone. Junmin was a part of his past that we know nothing about. On the fateful day of the match, Dan personally checked every item delivered since the incident with the milkshake. Choi unexpectedly showed up to their room in guise of saying hello to his fellow Koreans. His goal was to cause a ruckus in the room that gave this guy a chance to slip in and swap the pain relief spray without anyone noticing anything. Jaekyung hurt his ankle during a pre-game warm-up with his trainer, and Dan brought the swapped spray that caused Jaekyung further harm than good. Evidently, it was all part of Choi's scheme to injure Jake Young before the match and cause a rift between him and Dan. Both Coach and Jake Young berated Dan for not being thorough in checking the supplies, but he really did earlier. To make things worse, Jake Young refused Dan's help to dress the wound and went to the MFC's medical center instead. Juman was aware of what went down with the spray, and he targeted Jake Young's right ankle intentionally over and over in the first round. The plan was to hit Jake Young in all his weak points, and his unhealed shoulder injury was a target too. The match was a brutal one, with both opponents going for the kill, trying to emerge the winner. At the end of the 5 rounds, there was no clear winner, and the judges declared a tie. To a reigning champion like Jake Young, the only favorable outcome was a win, so a tie meant defeat in his vocabulary. Jake Young let out all his frustrations of losing the match on Dan, saying he knew about the meeting and that Dan could be the mole planted in their gym because he loves money so much. There was nothing Dan could have said at that moment to defend himself, since Jake Young had already made up his mind. The doctor examining Jake Young declared his foot treatable, but the shoulder injury needed surgery to get better. This would result in a longer recovery period while out of commission. In the room with Team Black were the others from Beck Junman's team, talking trash about Jake Young. It was their intention all along to provoke Jake Young, who fell for the trap obviously, and he ended up beating the daylight out of his opponent. The incident led to his disqualification, and the media dubbed him the Fallen Champion. Many athletes abandoned ship at Team Black Gym after that incident to join King of MMA Gym. They had been offered good deals, and some of them didn't get along well with the star of Team Black, so they saw a chance and took it. One of the athletes who left invited Potato to a drink that evening with his new buddies from King of MMA Gym. Potato overheard them talking about how Choi made big money on betting by sabotaging the match even before it begun. He reported all that to Jake Young and the others from the gym in the hospital after the surgery, but it was already too late. Although Dan was cleared of any suspicion, he had already resigned from being Jake Young's physical therapist. He even moved out of the penthouse apartment to go see the ocean with his grandma. Saying goodbye in person would have been awkward given their recent clash, so Dan opted to write a letter instead. In it, he promised to wire Jake Young all the money he'd used to pay for his debt and grandma's hospital bill. The season concluded with Jake Young finally admitting to feeling like trash. There will definitely be chasing in the second season, and I'm stoked to see him beg Dan to take him back. Hope he suffers a lot for everything he's put Doc through. Now you are all caught up. Season 2 is just around the corner. See you then.